UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomenon. Are they extraterrestrial, interdimensional, time travelers in origin, or are they simply a result of top-secret military projects, false flag alien invasions, PSYOP, drones, or other human-made aircraft? Join the discussion now on UAP Cross Fire.
Well, somebody ought to start.
Yeah, I was going to say, is my microphone working?
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to UAP Cross Fire with Don Ecker, Chris DePerno, and Dan the Padre Carlson. Commander Cobra speaking here. Sorry for the somewhat disjointed opening. We were having a fans-only moment, and you don't really want to have any more details from that if you want to stay a member of the show. We also found out some really interesting things about the folks that listen to our show, and we do love our audience, and we really appreciate the greatest audience on the planet on KGRA Radio DB. We have a super guest tonight, a longtime friend of, I think, everyone here except for the Padre. I think it's the first time he's really probably had any encounter with Stan.
Yep.
As many of you know, Stan Gordon, the guru of the UFO Superhighway, which is nestled in western Pennsylvania, going into West Virginia, extending all the way over into Michigan. When I transit through that area, especially by vehicle and sometimes by airplane, I always check in with Stan on the way going in or the way coming out, just to find out what's going on. I've yet to spot anything in that part of the world, but Stan always has interesting things to tell me. Stan's also one of the original folks that I think, with Paul Eno and a few others out there, really seem to latch onto the intersection of UFOs, cryptids, and other activity. One of the greatest things about Stan is his nearly lifelong pursuit of activities in the, starting with Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, recovery of something that came down, and I'm sure we'll get into that at this point tonight. He put together a great set of investigators, volunteers, a network that carries on even though he doesn't actively participate as much in that network as he used to. I'll let him answer in a second on that, but he remains a real force to tour in a lot of the activities. I'll turn it over to Don, who knows Stan as well, and introduce him and bring him onto the show. Don?
You bet. And coming myself originally from Pennsylvania, although it was a number of years later when I met Stan, I'll never forget the night that the Kecksburg incident happened, because my hometown was in Altoona, Pennsylvania. I'm going to guess, because it's been a while since I've been back there, roughly, somewhere between 80 and 100 miles from where Kecksburg is. But it was all over the radio. And it was actually quite an exciting thing. I believe it was 1965, and if I'm incorrect, Stan will correct me. But later on, we met. He's done yeoman's service in Pennsylvania and for the UFO field in general. Now, although Pennsylvania never quite got the notoriety that a number of states in the vicinity had, states like New York, New Jersey, West Virginia, Ohio, but a veritable eerie series of events have happened throughout, to and including mutilations and cryptid sightings. When I first became involved in the UFO field, I did an intensive, roughly 6-month deep dive into the lore. I haunted libraries, bookstores, started collecting telephone numbers, calling people up, people like John Keel, people like Stan Friedman, Bruce Maccabee, later Linda Howe, basically introducing myself. And I was trying to get a grasp and a firm handle on what in the world was going on. And then along the road, Stan's name popped up. And with that being said, let me bring Stan on. Stan, it's a real pleasure to have you here. Welcome to UAP Cross Fire.
And thanks, Don. Thanks for having me back on the program. It's good to talk to all of you fellows here this evening.
You bet. Now, Stan, the one case that you are most well known and regarded for is, of course, the Kecksburg event. Was I correct? Was that December of 65?
That was correct. December 9th, 65 was a Thursday evening. I remember it very well. I was 16 years old when it happened and started documenting the information that was breaking on the news all over Pittsburgh that evening.
Right. And it also in central western Pennsylvania, it probably went statewide. Now, there are a lot of weird questions about that event, including apparently a covert United States Air Force truck and convoy that came over that ultimately ended up, by all accounts, getting that thing on a flatbed truck. They covered it up in a tarp and drove it out of there. Is that basically the facts?
Well, yes, it's pretty close. It's a very long, detailed account. We could talk for probably days about Kecksburg. I'll give you a brief but a little longer summary because there's a lot of detail. It was December 9th, 1965, and I happened to be tuned into the primary radio station around Pittsburgh, KDK, that night. They had a talk show called Contact, and coincidentally, the host of the show had a special guest on who you will all recognize was Frank Edwards. And I was tuning in to listen to what Frank Edwards had to say, but almost the entire program is focusing on this breaking news about this brilliant fireball that was seen from Ontario, Canada, over Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. And it was about 4:47 p.m. in the Pittsburgh area. It's just getting dark when the phones and the police departments, radio, TV, newspaper offices are ringing off the hook from multitudes of witnesses to see this fiery object moving across the Pittsburgh area sky. And it wasn't long after reports came in that whatever that object was, it fell into a wood ravine near the small community of Kecksburg of Westmoreland County. So to make the story short, and there's a lot of detail, and there's a lot we did not know at that time. It took me years and years to track down hundreds of people who were involved in the incident and turned to amazing story what I uncovered. But anyhow, as this is being broadcast on radio and TV around Pittsburgh, hundreds of people began to descend on the small farming community, including reporters from all the Pittsburgh radio, TV, and newspapers who were on the scene. So they became a part of the story. But here's what I found out we didn't know at the time. Whatever the object was, it came in from Pittsburgh area, it moved into Westmoreland County, it went over the city of Greensburg where I live, and no, I did not see it. But what we found out was that it moved out towards Route 30 East, made a turn to the south. It's seen sequentially by people all along these rural communities. It goes about 3.5 miles out to the mountains of Laurelville. It reportedly kind of hesitated over the mountain, began to track back outside of Kecksburg, made another turn down, and then dropped down into the woods. And I interviewed some of the local people who saw this thing come in only, for example, a couple hundred feet over their head right before it fell. And witnesses said this thing did not come down at a high rate of speed. It came down moving about the speed of a small aircraft on approach to an airport and went down into the woods, and they thought it was like a controlled landing. No reports of parachutes being found. What we did not know at the time was that some of those local residents went down into the woods as soon as it fell, some thinking it was an aircraft that had come down, and they come across this large metallic acorn-shaped object semi-buried in the ground. So this thing is about 10 to 12 feet in length, about 8 to 10 feet in diameter. It's one solid piece of metal. Luckily, one of the volunteer firemen who stood only a few feet away from it, who later was a machinist all his life, I'll never forget what he said to me. He said, It was kind of an off gold bronze color, but he said it looked like somebody took liquid metal and poured it into an acorn-shaped mold. So there's no weld marks, no seams, no fuselage, no wings, but on the back rim of like you would have on an acorn were these unusual markings that look more like some kind of ancient symbols. So from your question you asked me, what was really intriguing that many, many people interviewed, including reporters from all over Pittsburgh, from the Pittsburgh News, who saw this as well, there was, within a relatively short time after the object fell, some of the locals began to report a very small military presence in the area. For example, a military jeep riding around. But over the next several hours, numerous military vehicles were coming in from different directions. There was Army, there was Air Force, and some people interviewed swear that they either saw or interacted with NASA personnel as well. And there were lots of details over the years that I did not put out publicly because I wanted to see if I would get other type of confirmation. One of those details was the fact that, yes, I had good information that there was it was an Army military flatbed tractor trailer. But then over the years, I had enough confirmation to indicate there were two military flatbeds at the scene that night. And the one with the object went out around 1 o'clock in the morning. The object had a tarp over it. There was a military escort. That truck went to Lockbourne Air Force Base near Columbus, Ohio. It was backed into a hangar. The trailer with the object was backed into a hangar. There was a military security team that surrounded the hangar. I was told by one of those security guards that they were given a shoot-to-kill order to anybody who approached that hangar without the proper clearance. It stayed there for a short time, then it continued on to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Later, I was told exactly what building it went to at Wright-Patterson, and was not the infamous Hangar 18. Where is that today? We just don't know.
Two questions, Stan. Number one, if this object was observed maneuvering, obviously that puts to bed the business about it being a Soviet space satellite, correct?
Oh yeah, there were multitudes of theories from the day it happened. Right around the time it happened, up to even in recent years, there's continuously have been many theories. None of them seem to fit with the information at hand. I've gathered a lot of information. Why I put a lot out, there's certain details I have not revealed yet because I'm hoping still to get some other enough confirmation to verify certain details I have. But you're talking about Cosmos 96, and that was one of the reports that we had years and years ago that we thought maybe had something to do with what had taken place. So Cosmos 96 was a Soviet Venus probe that had a technical malfunction, and from documents we obtained, apparently that object re-entered the Earth's atmosphere over Canada around 3:18 a.m. on December the 9th, the same day, interestingly. This incident happened around 4:47 p.m. in the afternoon. And anyhow, as some of you are aware, many years ago, back in, I believe, 2002, 2003, Leslie Kane, who was then directing the Coalition for Freedom of Information and was being backed by the Sci-Fi Channel at the time, they chose the Kecksburg case to do a major investigation. They were able to follow up on a lot of things I didn't have the capability to do. They tracked down a lot of people involved, including some Air Force personnel who were involved in the incident. And pretty much some data that they obtained, they pretty much were able to eliminate that Cosmos 96 was the cause. It is very detailed. There's still some articles on the internet. You can read about this. And but that was one of many different theories on it. One of the first theories I had, I talked to a family who was interviewed by an Air Force officer at the time it happened. They were told at the time there was a Gemini capsule that had been expelled in the area, which of course we realized and found out that was not the case. So it's a very fascinating case. There's a little more to the story. Hopefully sometime in the future I'll be able to tell more. I need more confirmation, but it's a very interesting case, and what it is so far, nobody's come up with a good theory that seems to explain what it was.
Okay, and my second question is a little darker, but it's my understanding that this event caused a great schism in the community of Kecksburg. neighbor versus neighbor. What was the reason for that?
Well, I think that goes back many, many years ago, and I think that was probably back in 1990 when Unsolved Mysteries used that for their season premiere, which was a major program. I can tell you, once that was broadcast, the floodgates opened. I received so much new information from all over the country, from so many sources. It was amazing. But this is a nice small rural farming community, and a lot of those people out there who had properties around there. I think what we kind of learned was that they were afraid that once that made the news, that you would have people from all over coming in and trespassing their property, and they tried to stop the show, as I understand, or as I recall. But I can tell you, in general, there's always been a great amount of support around that area because so many people saw it. So many people had neighbors, friends, relatives who were involved in it. But right after it happened, I talked to witnesses who were involved, and they told me, they said they just kept their mouth shut because, it's in the paper the next day. It's making major headlines all over the Pittsburgh area, all over Pennsylvania. It's making national news. They knew what they saw. They saw the military. Some saw the object. And the next day, when it says that officially there was a search, nothing was found, that the Pentagon had already released information they believe was just a bright meteor in the sky. The state police came out with a statement. They thought it was just the imagination of a couple of young kids, and actually it was only one kid that they were focusing on at the time, and that was it. So many, many people kept quiet for years and years, and that's just a small part of the story.
Chris?
Well, Stan, first, thank you for being on the show. Really appreciate it. I've done a little bit of research on your stuff, and it's fascinating, so I got a lot of questions. But the first question I want to ask you is that you had talked about that this object was changing direction, actually hovered in place for a few moments, and then did it crash or did it make a controlled landing?
Well, according to, it depends, I guess, how you interpret it, what people said. The people I talked to saw it all said it came down relatively slowly, almost made like a controlled landing. So some people would probably call it kind of a crash landing. Depends on interpretation. I can tell you this, from what we found out, we did not have an exact location in that large wooded area until mid-1980s. Well,
wow,
we had
okay.
more information, and my team and I researched in that area, and we found what appeared to be a pattern of trajectory or damage. We found a pattern of tree damage going down into the wooded area where the trees were knocked down in the same direction, the top of trees were knocked out, and we had a pretty good idea where this thing may have fallen. Problem wasn't until 1987 that we had our first eyewitness who actually saw this thing on the ground. It was during a major public event I was holding at the Westmore Mall in Greensburg when I had my research groups at the time. We had a very, very large display. Thousands of people came in from all over for the mall to see the display. And it was just by sheer luck that we had a very small little display on Kecksburg. And this family happened to walk by. I was having my lunch at the time, and one of my members was there and another fellow, and they were talking about the incident. And this man, his wife walked over, may have been another child with him, till I don't remember at the moment. And anyhow, they're listening in, and the man says, "Excuse me, are you talking about that thing that happened near Kecksburg?" And they said, "Yes." He said, "I was on the search team that found the object." So they pulled him over the side. They got a hold of me right away, and this fella gave us a very detailed account that he was not from Kecksburg. He was a teenage volunteer fireman at the time who was called out with other volunteer fire departments to the Kecksburg area to search for a possible downed aircraft. That's how the reports came in from all those sightings coming in around the area. And he was not from Kecksburg again, but he said he would go out with us and try to find the area. We told him nothing about the area. We told him nothing about the tree damage and pattern we found. He remembered certain landmarks from that night where these trucks left the firemen off to go search up into the woods. And they had walkie-talkies at the time. And he recounted to me that they were out there searching. They'd let them off. They were conducting a grid search of the area, came over the walkie-talkie that one of the other teams had found the object, which they thought they were going to overlook at an aircraft that was down. So they find a way over this area, and there was like a little embankment there, and the guys were standing at this little embankment looking down, and here's this thing semi-buried in the ground. And so anyhow, they're standing down there, and they're looking at this thing, and they realize this is unlike anything they have ever seen before. It did not look like an aircraft. And anyhow, it wasn't long after the two men in trench coats came down with a yellow civil defense Geiger counter, looked at them. Right behind them were soldiers coming down through the woods. They were so close to the firemen, they aimed their flashlight beams at each other, and then they were told this area is now quarantined. You have to leave the area now. And that's just one little segment of the story. And the next year, we got a lead that another local person may have been the first person who went down right after the object fell. And he lived right over the hill. He did talk to us. He confirmed the story, just said that he didn't want to get involved too much. He wanted to keep his name out of it at the time. He took us down from a completely different vantage point into those large woods, took us way down through the woods, across the stream and other areas, and he stopped at a tree and said, I stood behind the tree, and that's where it was, right over there, and that's exactly the same spot that the other witness took us to the year before. And then later, a third witness, who was a young boy at the time, who played in the woods every day with his brothers and sisters, they saw everything was going on that night. They saw the military flatbed go down empty and come back out with something on it. They saw military vehicles, all the lights down the woods. And the next morning, they went down early because of all the commotion to see what was going on. That's when they saw the trees were knocked down, and they saw that the Army had cut their fence where they had some cows to get their equipment and vehicles down to the crash site. So you had independent people unknown to each other who all took us to exactly the same location in the woods.
Stan, my next question for you is this. Because of the way the object moved and stuff, do you believe that this was a manned vehicle or unmanned vehicle? Was there any evidence of a pilot control to this object?
Well, from all we could tell, this thing was intelligently controlled, whether internally or remotely. And we can only speculate on certain things. But I have always kept an open mind. There have been multitudes of theories from the time it happened. A lot of these theories we were able to look into and disprove. A lot of them just didn't fit at all with what we were told. And I still keep an open mind. Like I said, there's some interesting other information that I've been obtaining over the years, and I'm hoping to get more confirmation. But I think there is a possibility from what we have that there could have been someone or something inside of this object. And I just have to keep an open mind, and we'll see where the evidence leads us to.
Great. Thanks, Stan.
Stan, I have a few questions. First off, just a very simple one. It's December. It's in Western Pennsylvania. Was there snow on the ground?
No, there was not. In fact, it was an unusually little warmer night, and I was told that he had this small little farming road that circulated around the wooded area where this thing came down. As it was all over the news, there were apparently hundreds of people jamming this little farm road. People had picnic baskets out there. The kids were eating. People were standing around everywhere. But as the evening went on, and I was told this by some of the authorities and people who were on the scene that night, that so many people were coming in and people were wanting to get down to the site that the roads were blocked off. They were people were not allowed to go anywhere near that area once they got in, and it was very, very fascinating. But
okay,
I'm trying to think because there's so many variations of the story here. So I'll tell you one interesting account among so many. There was a young fellow who later became an engineer. His house was right on the main drag, I guess you could call it. There was not much in Kecksburg. It never was. And he and his brother were sitting there on the steps of their home watching all these Army trucks coming in that particular evening. While he's sitting, he was a 14-year-old boy at the time. An Army Jeep pulls up with a driver and an officer, and they start talking to the boy to talk to him. And the officer says to the boy, "You can do something for your country." And he says, "Well, what's that?" And he said, "Well, all these people are coming in to see where this thing fell. If people ask you where the landing site was, where it came down, we want you to send them off and tell them it was somewhere else. And he said for a number of times that evening, that's what he did. People came up and asked questions. They sent them on their way in a different direction. I thought that was kind of an interesting account.
Yes. Now, I have a three-part question here, and you can just unpack it as you wish. In the weeks and months and years after this event, did anybody report any strange impacts that could have resulted from this to the environment of the area, such as the plant life, the animal life? Were there any reports from people of ill effects, dizziness, vomiting, anything like that? And finally, in the after effect, were there ever additional searches where military returned a few times, perhaps with search dogs or special equipment, and expanded their radius around the object?
Very good questions. I can tell you this. One, as far as I'm aware, there was never any widespread reports of any physical problems from people in those areas. Without me getting too deeply into it, I can tell you that one person who was reportedly very close to the object, throughout his life, he had all kind of unusual medical problems, which he always thought was because of the fact that he was close to this object on that particular night. He's no longer with us. There's no way we could prove that, or he could prove that, but he always thought he had some connection to that.
Would that possibly be radiation, Stan?
When we first found the site, and was, again, mid-1980s, we had radiation equipment. We checked. Everything was normal background radiation at the time. So there was nothing like that. Over the years, it was periodically checked, and some interesting things showed up. When the Sci-Fi Channel had a forensic team come in, and what is interesting, and again, this is from memory, it's going back years and years ago. I haven't thought much about this in a long, long time. But anyhow, they brought in a forestry expert. I always said to those involved, the evidence is in the trees. Where the trees were knocked down, the trees were broken. And interestingly, the forestry person on the scene, he's looking at the photographs that I had taken at the time. He found the pattern down there, and judging by the dating of the tree, the rings inside the tree, he was able to tell when the trees stopped growing. And interestingly, they dated it back to, guess what year? 1965.
Huh. It's fascinating.
Yeah. Oh, but then your third question is, this is really fascinating. So this is Thursday night. This happens, late afternoon, 4:47, 4:48 p.m., somewhere around there in that area, and probably around 4:48, 4:49, somewhere generally around the area where it fell. And the military is coming in that evening. So a lot of people see the military, the object's out of there. Early the next morning, here's the headlines on all the Pittsburgh area papers. The local paper, the Greensburg Tribune Review, had two editions. The morning edition had Army ropes off area, unidentified flying object falls near Kecksburg. And it goes on to say that apparently something did fall, that no one's being allowed anywhere around the site, that there was talk of radiation may be involved, that they are awaiting the arrival of civilian scientists, Army engineers to examine whatever it was. Okay? And then the later edition, the paper has searchers fail to find object. It goes on to say there was a search to early morning hours. They found absolutely nothing, and it was just, they believe it was just the imagination of the two local kids, and officially it was determined they believe there was a bright meteor in the sky, that there was no rockets or any type of military activities that could account for what had taken place, and officially that's how it stood. But interestingly, at least one other newspaper, and then later we found out that a very local newspaper, was a weekly, they did a story on it the week later, and it confirmed the same story. But then over the years, I had it, and again, this was something I didn't talk about for years until I had enough confirmation, but I had independent witnesses from that area, unknown to each other, who all confirmed the fact that early the next morning, Friday morning, when they're already saying everything's done, there was more personnel back at the scene. Now, not as many as the night before, but there were people, there was apparently military, there were men in what they called moon suits they had seen the night before, and decontamination outfits the next day. And they were apparently back down into those same woods. And one of the interesting stories is one young fella at the time, his name was John Hayes, who luckily, as far as I know, is still with us today. And he and his family watched all this activity. Their home was closest to the impact site down in the woods. So they saw everything that was going on. Early the next morning, John and his brother, again, who played down those woods every day, and they saw what was happening with the lights and everything down in the ravine that evening. They decided they wanted to go down and see what's going on. That's when they saw that the fence had been cut, that the trees had been knocked down. They're walking down through the woods, and they told me, John told me, he said, there was a man down there with some kind of instrument. He didn't know if it was a metal detector or a Geiger counter. But the man said to the boys, you boys need to get out of here. There's a chance of radiation. They didn't know what radiation meant, so they ran home to ask their parents. So that's just an example. So there was more activity the next day, even though it was already said that nothing was there.
Okay.
So Stan, I'm going to jump in. All the accounts, I've never heard much about sound. Did anybody report sound on this approach and what I would consider a crash landing based on how it's been described?
There was some reports of people who were listening was fairly level, hearing like a hissing noise as it moved across the sky. I heard maybe one or two reports, nothing from the immediate area of anything loud, like a loud impact.
Right.
There was somebody around that time, and I think it was probably like in the 15, 20 minutes, maybe even before that happened, that somebody heard a blast. But there was, I can't remember, it was a quarry. There was something where they do blasting out there every once in a while. There was no widespread reports at the time of impact of a loud impact, no.
So what it's always been curious to me, because I always chalk this up to this was a satellite that came down. Then over the years, as you and I have talked about this particular incident, I've actually made the pilgrimage out there. I was working out in Western Pennsylvania, and on an off day, I have a picture very similar to yours that's on the screen. And I know we have festivals out there on almost a yearly basis and those activities. But as you have explained it in other sources that I've looked at, I often think they're probably reporting some of the information you've put out onto the web. So I'm not sure how independent it is, but I've seen enough other pieces that it appears that this had a lot more controlled, as you would say, a crash landing, like an engine out type situation that was going on. There's normally, when you have something like that's coming off an orbital kind of approach, you're going to have a sonic boom. You hear this almost every time when everything from SpaceX to when we were flying the space shuttle, you're going to hear some kind of projected sound barrier break as it comes through that. So if that occurred, it must have occurred much higher, much further away, if that was the case. And this was much slower. And all the reports are there's not a lot of deformation to whatever this vehicle is, whatever this structure is. It was fairly intact. And it makes a lot of sense. I've read some reports where it actually appeared to avoid hitting obstacles on the ground, like a fence and things like that, which makes me think more almost of a human occupant, because that would be one of the things that you would want to avoid, if you saw something like that. So I think the sound or the lack of sound. Part 2 question, or the next question. Are you familiar with our Reverend James B. Jones? Have you ever seen his postings?
It sounds like I've heard the name, but I've been in touch with so many people. Not really, no. I can't say I have.
All right. Well, he's got an interesting take on this. He is one of these guys who really is deep into the FOIA files, and he found this is one of the first major uploads of information was the Kecksburg incident. He includes a picture that I think is not it's no way it's an actual picture. It's just too fantastic that's in there. But it illustrates the description with the two vehicles that you described. And the interesting thing that I bring up is that he makes the conclusion, most likely a spy satellite retrieval mission disguised as a UFO encounter. And I wanted to get your reaction. I know on other shows we've talked about this. And that's what I kind of thought we were up against when I first started looking at this. And it's partially because I'm colored for an incident very, very close distance to where I'm sitting, which did turn out to be a satellite to Hill Lake in Wakefield, New Hampshire, sometimes referred to as the Wakefield Monster. But that had a broken source of radioactivity. It was almost certainly tracked. They had much quicker response. This was back in 1978, and it was another wintertime approach, and it melted ice on a lake. But I'm curious what your reaction is to. Do you think this was a cover-up of a satellite recovery?
Well, once again, I keep an open mind, and I want to go back to your last question. There were apparently some reports of possible sonic booms, not in the immediate area where this thing came down or when it fell. There was no report of any major impact or sound from people in that area. But there have been some reports of possible sonic booms as it moved along the path before it fell.
That makes sense. That fits quite accurately.
Yeah, but at the site where it fell, had this been a reentry of space debris, a bolide, a big fireball meteor, that a meteorite that had come down, there would have been a lot more physical damage at the site.
Absolutely.
What we had basically were trees knocked down. This object was semi-buried in the ground, but it was fully intact. And, I mean, that's what witnesses reported, that what they saw on the ground was fully intact. And there was a witness who I interviewed after the Unsolved Mystery show who had seen the object at Wright-Patterson. That's another long story. But anyhow, he happened to see it after it had been recovered. It was inside of the building, a warehouse building, not Hangar 18. And he saw these fellows in white coveralls with sidearms and periodically changing their outer clothing. And he wondered what the heck was going on. He was told, stay with your vehicle. There was two drivers of two trucks there unloading a special type of engineering brick that was reportedly ordered by the Navy. And he believed these men that he saw working on the object were Navy personnel. And that's kind of interesting as well. But anyhow, he got to see this object up on scaffolding where these fellows were on ladders, apparently trying to open up this thing. And apparently they must have thought initially that he was cleared to be there. But as he's asking questions, they realized he was not cleared to be into that building. And they basically threatened him and told him, forget about everything you've seen, or we'll lock you up. But in 20 years, this will all be public knowledge. And of course, that didn't happen, whatever it was.
Stan, one question I have. Apparently, this thing had some weight to it. And as you said 2 times this evening, this thing was somewhat buried into the earth. How did they raise it up out of there? Did they bring a crane in? How did they do that?
Yep. Very few people knew about it, but I talked to independent witnesses. They had a small crane was taken down the area. You couldn't take the trucks right to the impact site. They had to winch it over to the edge of the field where they parked the truck, and they had a small crane to load it onto the back of the flatbed.
Okay. Now, let me, if we're done with this currently, let me go down another little road here in Pennsylvania. I don't know if you will recall back in about 1989, and for several years, I was involved when I was with my wife and I published UFO magazine. I was involved in some pretty in-depth research in human mutilations. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Now, roughly, I'm going to guess 14 or 15 years ago, I was at home one night. I got a telephone call from a friend of mine, and he said, hey, Don, he said, I just read your name in somebody's paper they wrote. And I said, in what regards? He said, well, it had to do with human mutilations. And I said, really? So he sent me a copy of this, and the guy's name, now Stan, you're going to have to bear with me. It's been a long time ago. I believe it was Stanley Wykowski. Does that name ring a bell with you?
Wykowski. It seems like I've heard it, but it doesn't really stand out. But it seems like over the years that the name has come up. It seems somewhat familiar. I don't remember any detail about it.
Okay, well, I'll give you the rough, dirty version. This guy claimed to have been a United States Marine Corps veteran, a gunnery sergeant, East 7, when he got out. He claimed Vietnam service, and he was I don't recall if he said retired, but a former police officer from, I believe it was Milford, Pennsylvania. Okay. Now, I had no reason initially to doubt any of that. So I ended up inviting him to appear on my radio show when I was with Cyberstation USA, which was, at that time, it was out of Boston, Mass. And I interviewed him on my show. Now, his claim to fame was that he had been investigating a very mysterious case in Pennsylvania that basically involved mutilation of a human body. Now, as time went on, he appeared in a number of other podcast venues. One of them was on the Paracast, which is out of, I believe, Arizona. Gene Steinberg is the host. And I caught that broadcast. And I started having some questions rise in my mind. Make a long story short, I was contacted by a private detective firm out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, about this fellow. Apparently, they had been tracking him. They tracked him to my broadcast, and they ended up sending me a number of documents. Now, basically, this guy had gone into the Marine Corps, but apparently he was ejected out of boot camp after 1 week. Okay? He had a criminal record, including, among other things, bank fraud, had never been a police officer, and the whole thing was a total scam from start to finish. But he had been very active in Pennsylvania, and you're the go-to guy in PA, so I was almost positive you would have been familiar with this guy.
And give me that name again.
I think this is correct. I'd have to go back into my records. They're in the other room. But it was, I believe, Stanley Wykowski.
I am not sure. It may be somebody that I'm somewhat familiar with. I did not know him very well, but the name is somewhat different, so I'm not saying it's him, so I'm not sure. Okay,
well, he has since passed away anyway. But okay, up and moving on, I guess. Chris, did you have?
Yeah, I just want to go back to one thing that Stan said, something that kicked my memory. Stan, do you think this could have been one of ours as a reverse engineer? And just hear me out on this, because I did some research on a thing called the Bell, the Glock that the Germans were supposedly working on, anti-gravity. And it's the same shape, but what really got me is that Jim Romanowski, one of the people you talked to, told you that there was hieroglyphic writing on it, what he thought was hieroglyphic writing on this shape. Now, I looked at the shape of the Glock, and it's damn close to what you're describing and what photos you have of, obviously they're not the same photos, but still they're, the description and everything is very, very close to what the Germans were doing. Now, as you know, in Operation Paperclip, we took a lot of the German scientists in there. And one thing that made me really curious about this is this witness who said, hey, listen, there was Egyptian hieroglyphic writings on this thing. What appeared to him is that. Do you think it could be ours, Stan?
All I can tell you is this. I looked into a lot of these different theories, including the Glock and the German bell you're talking about.
Yeah.
The people, 30 years more, probably more than that. I can't remember who it was supposed to be quite an authority on it. And from what I can tell and the much reading I've done on it and talked to others who have done research, while we know that they were definitely experimenting with different type of new developments during that time period, I've never seen any information that indicated that the Glock became a reality. And here's the thing, too. A lot of people don't understand the description. There are some things that may have looked somewhat like what came down in Kecksburg and the bell. But the object that fell at Kecksburg, once again, it was one seamless object. If you look at any of the pictures or sketches you see of the Glock, you can tell it's man-made. The object at Kecksburg, again, I'll tell you how the one witness described it. He said it looked like somebody took liquid metal and poured it into an acorn-shaped mold. It was one solid surface. There was no rivets, no seams, no weld mark, nothing like that. And these symbols, luckily, one of the witnesses who was very close to it, because of his background, he was familiar with Cyrillic or Soviet writing, and he said that positively was not what it was. These looked to be some type of ancient writing. But the problem is, only a few were close enough to see it, but nobody concentrated on those symbols. They're looking for a downed aircraft. They're only there a short time when they're chased out or in a position where they only see their short time. Nobody concentrated on what they really look like. So it's all, the few who were around was all from memory, and it's not enough to go on.
Yeah, just sticking with the UFO thing for a minute, and you've done a lot of research on Bigfoot, and I've always been fascinated with Bigfoot, with flying saucers. Have you ever gotten reports of these type of creatures coming off of these crafts? I know in MUFON we've had several reports of Bigfoot sightings near these crafts that have landed. Have you gotten the same thing?
Now you're getting into what I'm very deeply involved in. And I wrote about this back in the 70s, and now it's going on more and more. Now things get very, very interesting. Let me give you a little bit of background for you and people involved, because I've been involved quite deeply. I've been out in the field since the Kecksburg incident in 1965, investigating. So I've been doing this now for over 65 years. I have never personally seen a UFO or Bigfoot. I've interviewed thousands and thousands of UFO witnesses, literally, hundreds of Bigfoot witnesses, and multitudes of cryptid witnesses, even some in recent weeks. My hotline has been open since 1969. It never stops ringing. So between phone and email reports, I deal with these cases almost every day of current and past reports. And in the 1960s, I began to investigate Bigfoot sightings in Pennsylvania. I was completely convinced at that time that Bigfoot was some type of unknown primate. Well, then the early 70s come around, so I need to go back just a little bit. So in 1969, when I set up my hotline, and people began to hear about it, the phone in my home was ringing off the hook. People calling in about not just UFOs, anything unusual, from apparitions, haunted houses, weird creatures, anything unusual, they're calling me. It became apparent very quickly I couldn't handle this all on my own. So I decided I was going to try to organize a volunteer group of researchers. So in 1970, I founded the first group that for many, many years would investigate across Pennsylvania. Those groups no longer exist. I'm in touch, though, with many other researchers out in the field, many in the science community who are actively out there investigating. I get out as much as I can. The old knees aren't as good as they used to be. But going back to that first group in 1970, it was amazing who I got involved. I had scientists, engineers, technicians, police officers, former military specialists, all kind of scientific specialists. It was amazing. Many of these people had very high positions, for example, with Gulf, Alcoa, Westinghouse in Pittsburgh. And we were all doing this out of our own pockets. By 1973, I had extended to cover the whole state of Pennsylvania. And we were very lucky that we were set up. And we were really surprised because as people began to become aware of our investigations, we began to get referrals from the news media, from the state police, from other agencies. And in 1973, we had the biggest UFO and Bigfoot outbreak in history, I'm sure, anywhere in the country around the world. It was very well documented. So you got to remember, it's 1973. There's no internet. There's no cell phones. People had no way of knowing what was going on. However, many of our local newspapers in Pennsylvania, statewide newspapers, and then even national news were covering a lot of UFO sightings and some of the Bigfoot activity, and it was getting a lot of attention. But people still had no idea of the amount of cases we were working on. First, from the J1 of January of 1973 to the end of the year, there were hundreds and hundreds of UFO reports coming in. And many of these are not just lights in the sky. These are large structured objects below the ground. We had incidents of these things hovering near vehicles. There were incidents on the turnpike. There were landing reports. It was just amazing time. So we're out there day and night just trying to catch up on all this UFO activity. Some very interesting photographs were taken during that time as well. But in the summer of 73, we then experienced the largest outbreak of Bigfoot sightings ever documented. That continued into early 1974. We've had Bigfoot sightings in Pennsylvania every year since then, including already a little surge of activity this year. But going back into 73, so all these reports are coming in. We're out there day and night investigating. In many, many instances, as reports are coming in, myself or other team members are on the scene in these cases, sometimes within minutes to hours, documenting and recording what was going on. That's how we were able to record all this data and keep track of it. I wrote a whole book about it called Silent Invasion. But anyhow, so telling you, as I did previously, that I always felt that Bigfoot was an unknown animal. Well, as 73 comes around, we begin to see data coming in. We're interviewing witnesses, and some very strange things begin to come to our attention. One of the things was, we're getting reports all year round, including snow. So my teams get out there, and here we have incidents where we have a whole trail of large, unusual footprints with big strides going a distance and then abruptly just stopping when there should have been more tracks. That was the first thing. And then we began to see a pattern in the weeks ahead. We'd have a UFO sighting in a particular area. Within minutes to hours or days later, we'd have a Bigfoot sighting or vice versa. And then it got very fascinating. Then it's when we began to have some incredible incidents with UFOs and Bigfoot seen together at the same time and place. And I can just tell you, the more we became aware of this, and I can tell you, I had some very skeptical scientific people in my group, but some of these people spent many days and some years out in the field with me, and as they began to interview the witnesses, they saw the patterns, sometimes the animal reactions, they began to realize we're dealing with something very unusual. We just don't understand it. So I'll be glad to give you some detail of some of those cases because they are mind-bending, mind-blowing cases, and that's when we begin to realize that as strange as it sounds, the evidence is more and more, and a lot of this is ongoing now, that what we're dealing with has a physical and a non-physical component to it. For lack of a better term, we'll call it interdimensional right now.
Stan, very quickly, I've had some cases pop up over the years concerning these type of creatures. Now, let me ask you, I'm presuming that a number of these sightings, they left footprints behind, especially in connection with UFO sightings. Were these the 3-toed variety or the 5-toed variety of Bigfoot?
Both. We are receiving a lot of 3-toed reports. We made casts. I made a significant cast. You may have a picture of it there that you may be showing. And that was actually, I'll tell you the story behind it. So as these cases are unfolding, it was this particular case. It was, so my memory is tonight, it was July 31st, 1973. I got a call on the following Sunday, which was August the 7th. And I got a call from a relative of this person. They lived in a rural area outside of Greensburg. It was a rural area at the time. It's all developed now. And this man was in his home, and he was shaving early that evening because he always got up early for work. So he's shaving. It was a normal night. It was a warm night in July. Began to smell this funny rotten odor. He turns around. He's looking at the window in the bathroom, and here's these two huge glowing red eyes staring at him. The window's 8 feet off the ground. He had dogs outside, and the dogs wouldn't bark or move, and they thought that was so strange because his dogs bark for anybody on their property. So he runs into the house and starts yelling. Some of the other people come out, and they smell the odor. Whatever was in the window was gone. He was so shaken, he ended up in the hospital. So I went out to interview him the day I got the call, August the 7th. He was still shaken. He told me the whole story. I found out that several weeks before, some young boys in the area had taken a trip over to the local mall at the time, and they heard some noise in the woods, and they thought it was a deer, so they started throwing some rocks in to scare the deer out. Instead, the 7-8 foot tall, hair-covered creature comes running out, walking out of the woods, runs across the road up behind the house. So I was able to interview some of those boys, and I got permission to go up and look around the property. So some of the boys followed me up, and I'm looking around up there, and I remember on that hillside, the ground conditions were not really good for tracks, but I stayed for quite a while, and if I'm ready to quit, I have to look down. There was a partial footprint, but there was one complete track. It was 13 inches long, 8 inches wide, and 3-toed, clearly, deeply 3-toed. So I got on the radio, and I called one of my associates, and he came down, we took photographs and measurements, and made that cast. And while we're there, we get a radio call that one of our investigators north of Pittsburgh that morning was investigating the incident where something 9 foot tall was seen, and the police found big footprints up there. That started this massive Bigfoot wave that went on for months and months.
Okay, we gotta hold
Stan,
it there.
we're gonna grab you for the break here. Hold on 1 second. You're listening to KGRA Radio DB, UAP Cross Fire. Stan Gordon, our special guest tonight, and we're going to pick up this connection with Bigfoot and the UFO activity on the next side. Please stay with us.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected, only at kgradb.com.
And it appears we're back.
We are back.
And it appears that Commander Cobra is not.
Well, I'd like to ask a question or put a hypothesis forward here to Stan.
Please, Padre, please.
I like you am very interested in cryptids and as well as UFOs. And I've had this hypothesis for many years that there are two types of Bigfoot creature, as Don has mentioned. There's the three-toed, which seems to have red eyes and is more aggressive than the five-toed variety, also tends to smell worse. And might it be that what we're dealing with here is two things true at the same time, that there is a five-toed, shy, elusive primate, and then there is this other one with three toes and red eyes that is more belligerent and associated with UAPs?
Well, it's a very good question, and it's very complex. And again, the more I know about what we're dealing with, the more I realize that there's so much we don't understand out there. There have been three-toed and five-toed tracks for years in Pennsylvania, but there have also been, for example, four-toed tracks. And I have my presentation that I do, I show multiple casts have been taken. And these are all people that I interviewed or my research people did. They're all very credible people from many widespread areas. And there are so many different other types of footprints that many people have never seen. Some are consistent. They're found over many miles, over many years apart, and they're very similar. The point is, you cannot have, and not just talking about Bigfoot now, I deal with many, many different types of cryptids over the years. And the reports are stranger and stranger, even in past years. You can't have so many type of unusual creatures out there that people are reporting, because scientifically it just can't be. Yet at the same time, you've got so many very credible witnesses who are seeing these things at very close range, very detailed reports. You can't ignore the reports. So for a lack of a better term, and we don't understand what we're dealing with, but apparently under certain conditions, just like certain types of UFOs or UAP, these things come into our physical reality. They can leave evidence at times. There's all kinds of EM effects being reported. They appear and they disappear. They change physical form. It is so bizarre. We haven't even gotten into the strange stuff yet. And when we get into the orb things I want to tell you about and what's going on with them, it is just fascinating and very bizarre. A lot of this I wrote about in the 70s, and now all over the country, you're hearing these reports from many people in the Bigfoot field. You're hearing more about this now on TV and different talk shows. And I'm telling you, what we're dealing with here is probably one of the most important part of the UFO mystery, and people are just beginning to realize about it.
Is there any Native American lore from your area that corroborates the existence of these creatures?
Oh, yes. There's many, many reports from throughout Pennsylvania from Native Americans. And I was invited over the years to attend some of the powwow ceremonies they had. And many of those people talk about their family history of having encounters with Bigfoot and UFOs. And that was something I remember from many, many years ago. So, yes, and there's multitudes in the 1800s newspaper articles. Of course, they didn't call him Bigfoot back in those days. It was a wild man in the woods or the forest. And if you go to the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Society website, they have multitudes of 1800s Bigfoot newspaper accounts that you can read from Pennsylvania and from all over the country. So these things have been going on for a long, long time. There's all kind of legends. There's all kind of interesting stories out there. And again, I've interviewed hundreds of Bigfoot witnesses over the years. I've seen a lot of evidence. I've never seen one myself, even though I do believe back in 1973, when this was all going on a farm near Derry, PA, which is probably one of the most active areas in the country, year after year along the Chestnut Ridge. And it was already dark that night. These people had told me this thing was periodically coming back on their property. They had heard it screaming. Their dogs wouldn't bark. Their animals were going crazy. And they had called me that this thing had just been on their farm. Took us about a half an hour to get back out to the scene. I got there with a team. When we got there were footprints in the barnyard. The dogs wouldn't make a sound. There was a big cornfield, and something was already running away from us bipedal. You could tell it had a very long stride. It was making a loud sound like somebody with asthma, like very heavy breathing. I chased it through the field. I recorded the sounds. Whatever it was, I couldn't catch up to it, but I think it may have been the real thing.
Do you find that the three-toed variety is more aggressive or more belligerent in your sightings?
Don't have enough data to separate it, but I can tell you this. of the hundreds of Bigfoot cases I've had in Pennsylvania, and I have had literally incidents where people were within 5 feet away from these things, and very well documented cases. These things in Pennsylvania, they do not appear to be aggressive to the point where they're going to come after somebody and physically hurt them. Have we had reports of these things throwing medium-sized boulders and tree branches towards people? Yes. But even people said to me, they said, if this thing really wanted to hurt us or hit us, it could have. And it was so precise, the way it targeted them, not to hit them. They thought that was quite amazing. There is a lot more to this. It's very, very bizarre. Back in 73, I started telling you about this major wave. September 73, north of Pittsburgh, 2 women were waiting for a friend to pick them up. While they're standing there, they see this huge, white, hair-covered Bigfoot running across the road towards the woods, but in one of its hands, it's carrying a glowing ball of light. And a short time later, this object came across the sky, projected the beam of light down into the woods where the creature ran into. Well, we had no idea what we were dealing with in 73. But I knew a lot about what I call mini UFOs for years, these small orbs of light, balls of light that you're hearing more about. I knew about them in the 1960s. And in more recent years, these reports are increasing dramatically. In 2022, we had the biggest surge of these reports across Pennsylvania ever. And these were amazing, very strange reports. What I knew over even past years, further back, I had reports of these objects pacing vehicles in daylight, entering people's homes and cars through open windows. I've had them tap on people's living room windows and taking off when they're seen. And now in more recent reports, we're hearing more and more of these things appearing inside of people's homes. And I can give you some fascinating accounts like that.
Wow.
So, Stan, you have talked about the orbs, but one of the things I'd like to give the audience a bit of an overarching view. You have documented the near constant high level of activity. Obviously, it has a bit of a cycle to it. And you have a very interesting mix of what I consider classic UFO, UAP activity that has what we would probably conventionally agree, high strangeness, ET kind of factor. We obviously have a very well connected and documented cryptid kind of connection to it. We have this orb activity, which we've talked about recently with other folks in the area. And then we seem to have, the occasional black triangle aircraft. My fascination with all things black triangles that are flying over us that tend to have more of a man-made, or I would say a terrestrial kind of thing. Why do you think this activity level is occurring in such density in the area? Is it because you guys are just you and the rest of your network? Obviously, you don't have the same volunteer base that you actually organized. Because you're just looking more, or you're more available, or do you think there's something else that you've concluded over the years that's happening there?
Okay. Well, for one thing, in Pennsylvania, there's always been a history of incidents, but you also got to remember, even though I don't have my teams as such like I did years ago, I still have a lot of input for information from many sources. I'm in touch with many other researchers who also get reports, and I can just tell you from the calls that are coming in, which are constant all the time, people are calling me or emailing me about things they see, that even the last several years has definitely been an increase in very detailed activity. So, for example, year after year on my hotline, it would be normal in Pennsylvania as winter is approaching, the weather's getting colder, it's snowing, you begin to get a decrease in reports normally. But in October of 2021, we had a surge of close-range, low-level UFO incidents, including triangle reports. And it's never stopped since then. It was continuous UFO sightings, cryptid reports. Then in 2022, we had that surge of all kind of reports, but that surge of these small balls of light, orbs, whatever you want to call them, amazing cases, which I can give you some examples later on. 2023, we had an increase in very detailed triangle reports, but many, many large metallic cylindrical wingless objects similar to the Tic Tacs the Pentagon's talking about. We got quite a number of photographs on them from different areas. You can see some on my website. And those reports have been increasing more and more. Last year, for example, in April, there were 3 incidents in populated areas, 2 over Irwin, North Huntington, PA, low level right over the local area that people saw, and pictures were taken. There was one case in April in a suburb of Pittsburgh, Oakland, which is a very populated area. And I talked to one witness, and she said, look, I am very familiar with the Goodyear blimp coming over my house, going to the games in the area. She said, this thing was 3 times the length of a Goodyear blimp. It was only a few hundred feet off the ground. There was no gondola. It made no sound, and there was no markings on it. And black triangle reports I've investigated for years and years, since the 1970s. Some of those cases are very, very strange as well. I can give you an example of one case, for example. This was 2015, I believe, way up in the mountains here in southwest Pennsylvania. It was a beautiful morning. This fellow sitting in the kitchen, drinking coffee, looking out the windows. A beautiful morning. His big dog sitting there, laying there on the carpet next to him. Suddenly it got completely black, like this terrible storm came out of nowhere. And he thought, that's really strange. So he grabs his fully charged phone. He yells to his dog to come out. His dog, which goes with him everywhere, refused to go outside. The guy grabs his phone. He walks outside to his driveway. And 500 feet above him is this huge, solid black triangle, no sound, just hovering there. He grabs his fully charged phone, starts to record. Within a minute, his battery is completely drained of power. And now we're getting more and more reports over the last several years, even going back further than that, of these things, that people taking photographs, trying to take photographs with their cameras, with their phones. I've heard this with good, high quality night vision equipment, or recording, and suddenly all the electronics go dead, or the batteries discharge quickly. That's going on more and more. And you get these EM cases being reported, and it gets stranger and stranger, because there's EM cases connected directly with Bigfoot as well. There is so much people do not know about Bigfoot.
Stan, when I was growing up, and it's been over 20 years, actually 25 years or more, since I've been back in Pennsylvania. But Western Pennsylvania has always been huge for hunting, especially deer hunting. That was a big thing when I was growing up and in high school. Now, with that being said, thousands upon thousands of people there have their favorite deer rifles, their shotguns, whatever. Have you received any reports where people have ended up firing upon these Bigfoot creatures? And if so, what was the outcome?
Okay, now here's where it gets fascinating, and here's where you're probably going to want me to tell you about 2 of the most interesting, bizarre cases on record. And they're a little involved, but they're probably worth listening to. Have I had people shoot at them? Yes. Do I recommend people shooting at them? Definitely not. I can tell you, in all the years my teams were out there, we never took weapons. And from what we know, it wouldn't make any difference, because you're not going to be able to bring them down. Because I'm telling you, what we're dealing with is not a normal flesh and blood animal, which is what I thought it was. Would you like me to tell you a couple of these accounts?
Please, yes.
Yeah, please do.
So probably one of the most unusual, well-documented incidents occurred October 25th, 1973, as all these incidents are going on. As I'm telling you these accounts, I am not suggesting that these things are extraterrestrial in nature, because what we're finding out, that may not be the case in these type of reports. You know, I said years and years ago, from the multitudes of UFO incidents I investigated, I think there's more than one origin to the unknown category of the UFO mystery. I think a small percentage could be ET, extraterrestrial nature. Do I believe the government has recovered objects of unknown origin? Yes, I do. But I'm telling you, a lot of what we're dealing with has a physical and a non-physical component to them. These things can appear and disappear, change physical form, and for lack of a better term, once again, I'll call it interdimensional. So going back to this case, October 25th, 1973, there were numerous UFO incidents coming in during that 24-hour period on my hotline. 10:30 that night, I get a call from a state trooper from the Uniontown Barracks in Fayette County. He sounded a little shaken, and he said, I just came back from this incident. I think there's a good chance of something still up on the farm and pasture. Can you get a team up here as soon as you can? Well, it's late at night, but we did. I called some of the field members, and they came in. We got together. We took our equipment, got our radiation equipment, and of course that's before GPS, so we didn't know where we were going, but we found our way up to Fayette County. And what I found out was about 9 o'clock that night, you had 15 witnesses in this rural community. They see this barn-sized red ball about 100 feet off the ground that's moving very slowly and slowly beginning to move downward. So the son of the people that owned the farm was coming out to visit his family, so he'd be the adult. He's driving down the farm road. He sees this object in the sky. He sees people standing outside and watching this thing. So he goes to a neighbor's house to get a better view. And it looks like, yep, it's going to land in his dad's pasture. So there were 2 young neighbor boys in that house. And the 3 of them decide they want to go up and see what this thing is. So before heading up to the pasture, they stop over his dad's farm. He grabs a 30-06 and a handful of ammunition. He didn't realize that at that moment, within that ammunition, he had 2 tracer bullets. So those that hunt out there, when you fire those tracer bullets, you just get that luminous trail. Anyhow, they're making their way down towards the pasture, down the farm road, and the dogs around the area are going crazy. They hear this loud whining noise and these baby crying sounds. As they're getting closer and closer to the pasture, the sounds are getting louder. They angle their vehicle and leave the headlights on so they can see the path up the hill. They realize at that point, they're commenting that it looks like something's draining the power from the headlights. They never saw that before. Like they were not bright at all. They finally make their way up the hill to the pasture. They're standing there looking across the field. They couldn't believe what they're seeing. About 250 feet away, here's that huge object on the ground or right above it. It's no longer a complete sphere. It's like a half a sphere. It's a big white dome, about 100 feet in diameter, making that loud whining noise, illuminating the whole area. They're standing there trying to figure out what this thing is, but then it gets much more interesting. About 75 feet away, their eyes focus on the barbed wire fence. And along that barbed wire fence are these 2 huge Bigfoot-like creatures walking one behind the others along the fence slowly in their direction. The one in front, the largest, is about 8 feet tall. The one behind is around 7 feet tall. They're kind of stooped over. They're making long strides as they go from one post to the other. They're covered with long, dark hair hanging off the body. They have no neck. The arms are so long, they hang up below the knees almost to the ground. They have glowing green, luminous eyes. And the one boy is so frightened he ran out of the field. The other young boy starts yelling at the older fella, shoot him, shoot him. The guy fires his first shot over their head. That was a tracer bullet. There was no response. But here's where it gets really interesting. He fires that second tracer, and when he fires that second tracer, the largest of the 2 creatures reaches out as though to grab that tracer and makes a loud whining baby crying sound, and that huge luminous object in the field vanishes. It doesn't ascend into the sky, it just disappears. So most of the luminosity is gone, the sound stops, the creatures turn around, start walking back along the fence line towards the woods. At that point, he's firing live ammo from his 30-06 into the creatures. Guy's been hunting for years and years. He said, I know I hit them, I could see the response, but there was no effect on them whatsoever. So they run back to get to their truck. They go to the farmhouse, told the family what happened. They went to the neighbors and called the state police. The trooper arrives 45 minutes later. The witness told me, he told the trooper, he said, just forget about it, you can think I'm crazy. And the trooper said, look, we had a report of 2 similar creatures on the mountain the night before. I have to investigate it. So they go up in the troop car. The trooper tells me, he said, we're looking around for evidence. So what I'm giving you now is the short part of the story. There's a lot more detail. We don't have time. We can spend hours on one case. Anyhow, he said the trooper and the witness go up to the site. The area where the object was on the ground was self-luminescent and glowing, about 100 feet or more in diameter. He said the farm animals would not go anywhere near it. He said he shined his flashlight beam, he could barely see it, and he said, if I had a newspaper, I'm certain I could have sat down within that glowing area, read the newspaper from the glow. Anyhow, they end up going back to the barracks, I was told. Both the trooper and the witness were taken to 2 separate rooms. They were separately interviewed. Then they called me to take my team up that night, to send my team up. And I know we spent, I believe, the whole night up there. There was a lot of unusual things that went on during the night. I don't have time to get into it. It's an amazing, amazing story. And that's when we knew that we were dealing with something that was much, much stranger. And then as the weeks went on, the reports from widespread areas got even stranger and stranger. And then this case occurred February 6, 1974. I'm estimating maybe 20 miles from this other site, way up in the mountains, not too far from Ohiopyle. And some of your listeners remember the time period. It's February of 1974. There was a big national trucker strike going on. There was gas rationing around the country. A lot of people remember that. There was balance across the highways and across the country. In Pennsylvania, you had members of the National Guard and the state police who were patrolling together. You had members of both units who responded to this incident. I couldn't get gas early the next morning to get up to the site. Anyhow, it's a normal evening. This lady's in her little cabin home deep in the woods. She's lived in the mountains all her life. She knows animals well. She's a very good shot, pretty much not afraid of anything. She's sitting there watching TV. She hears this noise on her front porch. She has some empty soda cans, pop cans out there. Somebody was knocking the pop cans around. So a couple weeks before, I believe she told me, there was a pack of wild dogs that came through. So she thought, well, I bet those dogs are back. I'll just grab my 16-gauge double-barrel shotgun. I'll load one chamber, and I'll fire over the head, and I'll scare the dogs away. She proceeds to do that. She loads her shotgun. She walks up towards the front door. She turns on the switch to put on the outside light. She opens the front door and steps out. 6 feet in front of her is this 7-foot-tall, gray-haired Bigfoot that put its arm straight up over its head when she turned on the light. How did she respond? She pulls the trigger and fires right into it. She said there was this bright flash of light, like the flash on a camera, and that huge, stall-looking creature disappeared right in front of her. But her in-laws lived 100 feet away. They heard the gunshot, and they called and asked her what she was shooting at. She told them what happened. Her son-in-law reportedly, he grabbed his sidearm, started walking down the road, and reportedly at some point encountered 4 or 5 hairy people with eyes like coals of fire, starting shooting at him randomly. And then he headed towards the cabin, and about the same time, they observed a large luminous object hovering over the trees at the same time. That's when they called the state police for help. So I talked to the primary investigator, and he said it took them quite a while to find this place way up in the mountains. By the time they got there, everything was done. But he said something very strange happened up there. He said, one, the witnesses were visibly shaken. They were very credible. They gave very detailed account of what had taken place. But he said what convinced him were the animal reactions. Now, that's something I have seen many, many times. Even in recent months, I've heard reports like this from people who have had Bigfoot encounters. But anyhow, he said when they got on scene, they had several big dogs. Dogs wouldn't bark. They wouldn't move. I remember him telling me one dog was in a cage. I think it may have been an Eskimo Spitz. He said he opened that cage. That dog wouldn't even move. Should have ripped his arm off. There were other animals there that people said were not acting properly that night. They were very frightened. That's what convinced him that something had indeed happened. And then other strange cases occurred. I remember another case prior to that up in the same area. This fellow that evening was almost dark. He was walking his hunting dogs on private property. Way ahead of him, he sees a figure on his property. He yelled, "What are you doing?" As he gets closer, he realized this was not a human. This was a hair-covered ape-like creature. He had a sidearm. He took a shot at it. He didn't know if he hit it or not. Moments later, it visibly disappeared, but he could still hear it running, but he couldn't see it. That's just an example of the reports coming in.
Stan, I got something that may or may not be involved with the Sasquatch, but back in 1989, about the time I was becoming really involved in the field, I was working as a director of research for UFO magazine. I knew Fortean researcher, investigator, author John Keel pretty well, okay? And I had called John. As a matter of fact, it was Keel that originally put me onto the human mutilation thing. But anyway, I'm talking to Keel because one of my favorite books at that time was his fantastic Mothman Prophecies that he wrote in the mid-70s. So I'm talking to him about cattle mutilations. As a police officer in 1981-82, I ended up investigating 2 cattle mutes, okay? And we're talking about this, and I asked Keel what his take on this was. And he was very much into it. Then he told me something that I got to tell you, at first, I just thought it was crazy. But he said, I don't believe in ETs, basically. And I'm paraphrasing. He said, but I think they're not extraterrestrial. They're ultra-terrestrial. And Keel, as anybody that read that book, Mothman Prophecies, knows that he had some encounters with the infamous MIB creatures or whatever they were. And I said, okay. He said, I'll tell you, the cattle mutilation thing, I think they're taking the blood and various items from the animals, and they're using them to manufacture creatures, including the MIB. I think they're actually manufactured out of this blood and material, flesh, whatever, from the mutilations and perhaps the Sasquatch. And I got to tell you, it took me years to come to terms with that, Stan. But what do you think about that?
Well, I'm aware of what Keel had discussed. I can tell you, again, the multitudes of incidents I've investigated over the years. Yes, I've had some incidents where mystery men showed up. Some of the reports were pretty interesting, unusual. Let me give you a follow-up pertaining to the case I just told you about, October 25th, 73, with the UFO on the ground, the 2 Bigfoot there. And here's the interesting part of that story. Years later in the 1980s, just doing a follow-up investigation, sometimes with important case, I like to follow up with the witnesses and see what happened to them. And so the primary witness in that case, I can tell you, I've got to know him very well. He was a very nice fellow, passed away, unfortunately, many years ago. He didn't believe in any of these things. He didn't believe in UFOs. He was not religious. But after this incident happened, he began to have all type of paranormal experiences and premonitions that reportedly came true. And anyhow, in the mid-1980s, when we're doing a follow-up investigation, we never hypnotized him because of some of the odd things that happened during the night. And anyhow, we just proposed to him at that time, or thinking about possibility of, we have some professionals in my research team that could do hypnosis. We rarely ever did it, however. And he looked at us very strange and he said, well, why do you want to hypnotize me again? And we said, well, what are you talking about? And he said, well, back in 73 when that happened, your team was up here quite often investigating and checking things out. And this one particular day, these 2 men showed up. And he said, I always thought they were somehow connected with your group. One was in a dark suit. The other was in an Air Force uniform. The man in the Air Force uniform had a briefcase. They were very nice. They wanted me to tell them the whole story of what I saw, what I remember, what took place. And then the Air Force officer opened his briefcase, took out photographs of Bigfoot and UFOs, and they wanted him to point out the pictures that looked similar to what he saw. Then they apparently hypnotized him. They thanked them very much. They said, we believe your story. We'll be in touch. But he never heard from them again. And of course, this is 1973. Blue Book officially closed in January of 1970. And there was no data or no records of anybody from the military reportedly coming to that scene. So who they were, I don't know. But that was always a very fascinating account.
Well, what was your attitude about what Keel's theory was? These mutilations, the animals, the blood, the flesh. He felt that it was being utilized by these ultra-terrestrials. Do you have give any credence to that theory at all?
Well, I can tell you here in Pennsylvania, this is not an area that historically has had a cattle mutilation report. It's extremely rare over the many, many years I've been doing this. I've heard a few reports, but nothing and they were older reports, so we couldn't even get anybody out there and check it out. It was long past the time they had occurred. So it's a very interesting theory. I agree a lot with what Keel said, that the more I know about what's going on, a lot of these are not ET in nature. There's something much stranger. And I think both he and I are on the same track of what's been going on. I've verified and confirmed a lot of things that he talked about, and then I've learned a lot more. And it gets very, very unusual. And it's something that a lot of people don't know about with Bigfoot cases. And again, it's rare, but it's reported in Pennsylvania around the country that, let's say historically going back to, 1950s or so, you used to hear those reports of low-level UFO incidents where these objects were very low, hovering near vehicles. At that point, the cars would experience power loss, the headlights would dim, the objects would take off, and the power would come back on. We've had the same things occurring with Bigfoot cases, where a Bigfoot walked out in front of a vehicle, was close by, and the motor would begin to sputter, the creature would walk off, and the power would come back on, for example. That's just an example of some of the things we've heard.
Okay.
Well, Stan, I'm going to ask you a quick question. We had a spat of classically newly termed UAP events in the fall of 24, all over New Jersey into southeast Pennsylvania. I didn't get a chance to ask you about that. First, any involvement, any reports there that went along with that? The heavy-duty drone activity, which seems to have quite a bit of activity in your neck of the woods, literally, where I think most people would report this as being more of an aircraft-style event. Any thoughts, any reactions, and your opinion, if you don't mind, of what was going on there and what continues to go on much more sporadically?
I was involved with the mystery drone case from the time it started in November, but I had been receiving all year many other reports of other UAP, UFO observations that could not easily be explained. You know, since the time I was out in the field in the 60s, one thing I did from the start, especially with the research people involved, we always tried to find an explanation for what's being reported, whether it was a UFO sighting, a cryptid report, a Bigfoot sighting, and there continued to be many misidentifications of UAP UFOs. So a lot of sightings, as you know, especially in the wintertime, you get a lot of Venus and Jupiter calls, lots of Starlink satellites in the last few years. You get drone reports all year round because there's a lot of people flying them around. You get, weather phenomena. A lot of things are explainable. So that's something we always look from the time that we go on. So as I'm getting reports from Pennsylvania of drone sightings, but at the same time, I'm getting other reports of other objects in the sky making unusual maneuvers, doing some weird things. We're getting low-level reports of things close to the ground that were going on at the same time. So I later, of course, there was a lot of news reports at the time, but later we got some better information on some of the other reports from other states about these very large, unusual drone-like objects that were making unusual maneuvers. And the thing was, the reports of multiple objects in the sky at the same time doing a lot of unusual things. So I was receiving some photographs and videos in, and I must tell you, a lot of what I saw from Pennsylvania were indeed hobbyist-type drones. The lighting configuration, the sound, the movements, and some were aircraft that people just misidentified because of angle, the lighting conditions, things like that. But there was a lot of other things going on at the same time, and still continues to be. And so from what I understand, especially all of the sightings around military installations, it seems to me that some of these reports still have yet to be identified. There's still a mystery to it. And we can get into a lot of strange things, and I've heard other people talk about this now. I'm not saying this is what it is, But for many, many years, and Dawn, I'm sure you probably heard these stories go back many, many years ago, there were people who were talking about these UFOs that would physically change into aircraft or other type of objects. And I've been getting these reports even in recent years. There was one incident up in Fayette County, PA, in November of 2023. It was a beautiful day. It was a very warm day for November of 2023. One of my research associates, Jim Brown, investigator, he's a very high-tech, scientifically oriented guy. He got the report. And as I recall, this lady decided she was going to go take a walk since it was so nice. Happened to look out a window and sees in daylight, beautiful day again, a solid black triangle hovering about 50 feet over her neighbor's house. So she's watching this thing, but it's physically changing from a triangle to a square and back to a triangle. So she tries to call the neighbor on the phone. There's no answer. So she walks over and finds the neighbor outside in their garden. She points up to the lady's house. She didn't know this thing's hovering over a roof. They both stand there and watch this thing changing physical form. It gets up to about 500 feet, then ascends into the sky, and it's gone. But that's just a sample of the kind of reports we're hearing.
Dan, I'd like to...
That's wild.
It is crazy. Stan, I'd like to ask you about a couple of investigations that you did in Pennsylvania. Was there a report of a werewolf in Pennsylvania?
Well, you've heard about the Dogman reports, I assume.
Yeah, Dogman, werewolf, and stuff. I mean, it seems like Pennsylvania is getting everything under the sun. It's a hodgepodge of you name it, it's there.
Well, I've dealt with all of these type of things, from the Dogman reports. So going back to 1973, when that big, massive UFO Bigfoot outbreak occurred, there were many sightings of Bigfoot, your typical Bigfoot, 7 to 9 foot tall. Some were taller and thinner, some were shorter and more muscular, but there were similarities in reports, even smaller ones, around 4 to 5 foot tall. And also, I should tell you, in the last few years, including this year, we're getting an increase in reports of smaller sized Bigfoot creatures as well as the taller ones. So going back in 73.
Well, Stan, what about crawlers?
Case.
Have you had any reports of crawlers?
Yes. And I can tell you about those too. And I was very involved in those starting back in 2017. Which one would you like me to tell you about first?
Well, what you were talking about initially.
Okay, so going back to what he called a werewolf, or a lot of the Dogman sightings, where people have seen them, the face is more like a wolf or a dog. So anyhow, in 73, in the area called Beach Hills, outside of between Greensburg and Jeanette, was a very isolated rural area at the time. This lady was staying over at her friend's house that weekend. The home was out in the country. It was a very low foundation to the ground. So something easily could have crawled up on the roof. But it was around 3 o'clock in the morning, as I remember. She got up to go to the restroom. She's sitting there, and she's right there looking directly out the window. So the window, the screen, the window is directly in front of her, probably not, maybe a foot away. She begins to hear these strange animal sounds outside, and suddenly this horrific face rises up and is looking directly at her from the other side of the screen, directly in her face. She described in great detail. The face looked more like a wolf or a dog. It had glowing, luminous, orangish red eyes, as I recall, very prominent fang-like teeth. She was hysterical. She ran out of there screaming, and they called the state police. The state police phone patched her to me. I interviewed her. She was very shaken. A trooper went out. He found some tracks out there, and the lady was so frightened that she asked her friends to take her to her home several miles away. Within the hour at her home, the same or similar Bigfoot showed up at her property. That's not the only case I've had like that.
Wow, that's incredible. Stan, I got a report that you took a report about a woman being attacked by a Thunderbird.
I think you may be. I've investigated many Thunderbird reports, and there have been many over the years in many different areas.
I think it was in 2021.
But I can tell you, you may be referring to one that happened let me think here a minute.
Montgomery County.
Say again?
Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, 2021.
You're cutting out on me. I'm sorry.
Montgomery County, 2021, Stan.
Okay, now I can hear you. Okay. Yeah, that's outside of Philadelphia. That's what I thought you were talking about. And it, from what I recall, was a really interesting case. It was in daylight, and she was going to a particular appointment she had. And anyhow, it was April 2021, I believe. And she was pulling into the parking lot. She was on the cell phone with her friend, and something like a big shadow came right over top of her car. She thought it was a small aircraft that was about to crash right on top of her. And that's when she sees this huge, giant flying creature flapping its wings that soared towards the office she was going into, and it landed on the roof. And she told her friend that she was going to grab her camera and try to go and get a picture of this thing. So the woman gets out of the car and starts walking towards the back of the building, and this thing is perched up on the highest point of the chimney. She only saw it for a moment, and she said this thing looked down at her, made eye contact with her. It had piercing, fiery eyes. She said the eyes were large and round, and they were kind of a vivid green, red, orange color. And anyhow, apparently at one point when she looked back, they made direct eye contact, and then this thing suddenly came down from the roof and apparently began to glide towards her. And I believe she said, from what I remember on this report I'm looking at, it was about 8 feet behind her. It had its talons out. She just made her way, just pushed her way into the office door, even though it was a private office, to get away from this thing, yelling about this huge winged creature that had come down very close to her. She said this thing had at least an 8 to 10 foot wingspan. The body and wings were either brown or black in color, were shiny, which is something we hear quite often. And the head was as large as a grapefruit and red in color. And when we hear these reports, that's a very, very rare case. And there's similarities but differences. These reports go back to the Native Americans. And many people have seen these things in daylight, even in recent years, very close. And we actually had incidents where these things were on the ground. And that's what's fascinating, because as you know, even with UFO cases, it's very hard to judge altitude and size. So we've had some of these huge flying creatures, birds, on the ground eating roadkill. There was one case I looked into back, I think it was like 2007 in neighboring West Virginia, where a fellow was riding down a 2-lane road early in the morning, and he had to hit the brakes very hard because here's this huge flying creature. He said it was at least 4 foot tall, was taller than the top of his vehicle. It was a 2-lane rural road, and this thing was hopping from one leg to the other, eating roadkill, trying to get off the ground, and he could watch the dust and dirt going up from each wingtip. This thing finally got over top of the trees. The next day he came back and measured it. It was 21 feet across. So that was kind of fascinating. So you get these reports of huge, oversized birds. That's one thing. Then we got other reports of people who swear they've seen huge, black, featherless, leathery, bat-like creatures. And then you've got another variety of people. And again, many of these are really credible people with detailed accounts. I've written about a lot of these cases in my books, where these things appear to be prehistoric. They look like a pterodactyl or pterosaur. So once again, you've got people see these things year after year. They're credible people, but you never find any bodies, just like with Bigfoot. And I'm telling you, these things, there's data on all these cases, including the Thunderbirds, which suggests that these things, again, are not normal, unknown types of birds. There's something else. And then stranger and stranger. The other reports.
What about the crawlers, Stan?
Crawler reports. So in 2017, I think it was 2017, I got a call from a police officer in Pennsylvania. He had just come off of patrol, and he said, I had to tell you about the weirdest thing that ever happened to me. It just happened that evening. He said he's riding down a rural road that he often patrolled, and he sees this ball of light on the ground. Now, don't get this confused with the orbs, the balls of light we're talking about. So he sees this ball of light. It suddenly rises up off the ground, and he realizes it's the head of a very sickly-looking, tall humanoid creature with no hair. And that's kind of a grayish white sickly-looking thing with very long limbs. He said the head was illuminating the upper part of the body. It turned very quickly, and he said, I never saw anything move so quick in my life. He said it was here and it was gone. And I've heard that same thing from witnesses of Bigfoot who have had a Bigfoot suddenly appear in the middle of the road in front of their vehicle, not walking across the road, but just suddenly appearing in the middle of the road, see it from head to toe, and then it's gone. That's something a lot of people don't know about as well. So that officer gave me a very detailed account. He said he put his car up, he shined a spotlight on the area, there was no tracks. He said it was so strange. Then in the coming weeks, I began to receive reports and others around Pennsylvania. The year later, in 2018, about 40 miles away, witness tells me I went out to the house. I was at the house. He said, look, he said, I live in the woods. He said, my house in the woods, which it was. I work in the woods. And he said, this one particular day, I'm up on the hill behind the house. He said, I live with deer. He said, I know deer. I know what they sound like. I hear some bipedal sound that did not sound like a human, definitely wasn't a deer, and it kind of shook him up a little. So he decides to go down to his house. So he goes down to his home. He was there for a few minutes. He's sitting at the dining room table, which is only, I believe it was 8 to 10 feet from where he was. The door on the back door had no curtains on it. It was a big glass open door. He looks over, and here's this 6 to 7 foot tall, sickly looking, bony looking, hairless creature with glowing yellow eyes, crouched down on all fours, staring right into his face. He said he turned around a minute to grab a weapon. He turned back, and the thing was crawling around the side of the house, and he never saw it again. He told me it took him weeks and weeks before he went back out up on the hill where he used to work. That's just an example of those kind of reports. And then we began hearing them from all over the country.
So let me ask you this, Stan. You have intimated throughout our conversation this evening that there's something more than the physical going on. Being a pastor, which is why they call me Padre, I have an interest in this as well as a potential spiritual dimension to some of this activity. Just in your own opinion, understanding that's what this is, what do you think's going on here? Are they all connected? Might some of this be spiritual? And if so, how would you define that? How do you quantify that? Do you have a belief system that informs your hypothesis?
I keep an open mind to all possibilities. I think it has to come to interpretation. I've had many people in the religious field contact me and many witnesses who believe that spiritual nature. And then I have others that believe we're dealing with something that nobody understands, nobody knows for sure. And the more I learn about what's going on, I think a lot of these different anomalies, the orbs of light, at least certain types of UAP or UFOs, the Bigfoot stuff, the cryptid stuff, it's all interconnected somehow. The pattern I found many, many years ago was that many close-range, low-level UFO sightings and many encounters with Bigfoot and other cryptids often occur in the vicinity of energy sources. So you have numerous reports, for example, around all types of radio communication towers, cell phone towers, bodies of water, high-tension power lines, power plants, gas wells, gas lines, railroad tracks. It goes on and on and on. Very often we're seeing that. And by the way, over the years, we're getting more reports now in populated areas like suburbs of large cities of Bigfoot and cryptid encounters occurring, even in recent years, where there's not a lot of woods around. And so, again, a lot of fascinating things are showing up, and I think more and more a lot of these things are interconnected. And whatever it is, and it's not just what I've uncovered, I'm in touch with many researchers around the country and many people in the Bigfoot field. And what was happening in Pennsylvania years ago, now all over the country, in areas where we have a history of Bigfoot activity. Many researchers and witnesses have seen these small orbs of light coming out of the field, below the trees, and coming within a few feet of witnesses. That's more and more.
I'm sorry, you just mentioned something in your answer there about water. You know, we're beginning to, we had a show a couple of weeks ago that focused on USOs, unidentified submerged objects, or whatever that is. Can you expand on that a little bit? What are these things doing? Are they coming out of the water? Are they taking water on? And are there any lake cryptids that are associated with them?
Oh, yeah. That's another whole story. And again, I dealt with all these things. So the government's interested in what they call transmedium objects, and they're dealing mainly in military sightings, Navy sightings out in the ocean areas. For years and years in Pennsylvania, I've talked about incidents of these objects going in and out of the rivers and lakes of Pennsylvania. So you have many sightings around these areas. I interviewed a fellow a few months ago, and he had not reported this, and many people I ran into, they've never reported the sightings to anybody. We can't even imagine how much this is going on. But last year in July, he and a friend were doing early morning fishing at a lake area on the not far from the edge of the Chestnut Ridge here in Westmoreland County, where sightings going on for years and years. They saw a bright green sphere, bright green orb come across the sky and dive straight down into the Conemaugh River, and it never came out. So we have reports of these things for years of going in and out of the rivers and lakes of Pennsylvania. We've had reports of strange things seen in the rivers. And have I had reports of various types of cryptids in the waters and lakes of Pennsylvania? Yes, I have. There's been, everybody's heard of Nessie, but in Pennsylvania we have what they call Bessie. So Bessie goes back to at least the 1800s up in Lake Erie, where people claim to have seen a long serpentine-like creature, or something that looked like a plesiosaur. And many years ago, I interviewed a fella who swore that he was a passenger in a vehicle riding near Presque Isle Beach, where, by the way, a famous UFO landing incident occurred on July 31st of 1966, which may have involved something like a Bigfoot-type creature, a grow-like creature was reported. There was a major case that went national all over the country that Project Blue Book investigated, by the way. And but anyhow, he claimed to have seen this thing out of the water on Presque Isle Beach, and he swears what he saw looked like a plesiosaur. So, yes, we have reports of these things in the rivers and lakes of Pennsylvania for years.
So, Stan, over the years I've known you now, I've never heard you not maintain the same enthusiasm. We're working our way down a little bit in time here. So I want you to tell the audience how they can tap into some of this enthusiasm. Your website, we've been flashing it up onto the on the chyron of the screen. Where can folks find your books? And what's next? What are you looking at next? We got about 3-4 minutes.
Okay, well, yeah, the website is called stangordon.info, stangordon.info. There's a lot of information there of a lot of strange stuff, especially in recent years, a lot of historical stuff. That's just a sampling of the reports that come in. And there's just amazing things out there. My contact information's on there. They can reach me by phone or email. I get a lot of reports by way of email from around the country and out of the country. And my books are all available on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. That's the fastest way to get them. If you want to know the really detailed, really weird details about 1973 and the 74, it's in the book called Silent Invasion, the Pennsylvania UFO Bigfoot Case Book, and my most recent book, which has some very weird stuff in it, called Creepy Cryptids and Strange UFO Encounters of Pennsylvania. So there's chapters on weird things in the water, orb reports, close UFO encounters, Bigfoot activity, and I guarantee you there's cryptid things in there you never heard of before. Very, very interesting things. So my 4 books are available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
Well, Stan, this has been outstanding. This has been an outstanding show. We definitely have to have you come back. If you had one case that electrified you the most, and this will have to be a quick thing, what would that be?
Well, it's very hard to even pick one out. There's so much we didn't have time to talk about. I have multitudes of incidents that most people are not aware of. I can give you one very quickly. September 3rd, 1987, busy Route 30 outside of Greensburg, what was then the Green Gate Mall. Early evening, and multiple witnesses, including law enforcement, coming right along about 300 feet over top of the high-tension power lines on what they call Power Line Drive. Is this huge battleship gray metallic cylindrical object. It looked much longer than a Goodyear blimp, no markings on it, multiple lights, completely silent, no gondola. This thing is moving about 300 feet above the high tension lines, moving across the highway. As it's moving horizontally across the highway, where there's a power substation, this huge object turns vertical in the sky, and when it does, all the power in the area goes out, including the mall. And when the power company engineers went to investigate the annex behind the mall where the theaters were, because the power never came back on, they found all three of the master fuses had been blown in that circuit, which is something that's just unheard of, and they were very concerned over it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, gentlemen, I think we're essentially out of time, aren't we?
We sure are. Stan, as always, it's great to talk to you. I'm glad for those that have not heard from you before, that the opportunity to get it. I love your enthusiasm, and I always appreciate that you almost always pick up the phone when you hear my voice, or you call me right back. So I deeply appreciate the friendship over the years, and I hope, like one of these trips through Pennsylvania, I'm able to call you and tell you got to meet me on the road, because I've got something. And
sounds great. And I want to welcome everybody. We have many events this year. I'll be speaking at the Kecksburg UFO Festival this year, July 18th to the 20th. There's information on my website about it. People from all over the country come in. It's free. We had the free conference on Sunday, and you'll have a great time.
I highly endorse it. Highly recommend it. So for the Chris DiPerno, the Padre Dan Carlson, Don Ecker, Commander Cobra, saying great thanks to Stan Gordon and the greatest audience on the planet listening to us on KGRA DB, UAP Cross Fire. We will see you soon.